Good evening. It's wonderful to be back here with you again. My name's Cisco Walker. I'm an evangelist here in the beloved International District. I have Pastor Alonso Garcia from New Life Church of God, and he is with me tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about how there is still fruit that can be found in the city of Albuquerque. There's still fruit. And the reason I've come to this conclusion is I believe it's by and through the power of the Holy Spirit, but it comes out of Numbers chapter 13 and verse 26. It says this: "Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, 'We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan.' Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are able to overcome it.' But the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go against the people, for they are stronger than we.' They gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone as spies is the land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so were we in their sight.'" So today, for just a few moments, we want to talk about how there's still fruit that can be found in the city of Albuquerque. And we're going to be kind of talking about looking at some of the darker things that have happened here in the city of Albuquerque over the last 30 or 40 years. Because in order to see the light, you have to look at the darkness as well. You have to acknowledge it's there. You have to look at it no matter how ugly, no matter how repulsive, no matter how tragic. And it is tragic when you truly begin to rewind the tape, metaphorically, so to speak, and look at these things. But we always want to remember tonight, we must continue to look for good things in this city. Despite opposition, despite tragedy, despite poverty, we need to be reminded and encouraged that all hope is not lost for the International District and our communities. Most are able to acknowledge that there is fruit, potential, and beauty here in the city. Because there is beauty, there is potential, there are wonderful things in this city, there are wonderful people in this city. But many, even though they acknowledge that, they allow these metaphorical giants such as murder, drugs, and fear to stop them from enjoying life and possessing the land for Christ. And I would just want to qualify that for a moment. When we talk about possessing the land for Christ, we're not talking about, going out like the Crusades with the Bible as our sword and trying to convert and create a utopia for our church. We're not talking about that, but God has given us breath, and God has given us life, and God has given us the wonderful city of Albuquerque and wonderful people in the International District. And many people, they see that there's potential, they see that there's fruit, but they allow these giants to come in. And because of these giants, and what I have seen in my own heart and talking to a lot of people about Albuquerque is just like what happened here with the spies that gave the bad report. There's a lot of exaggeration of how bad things are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this topic is definitely a big one. It's definitely one that's relevant to the community that we're in, the people that we're around. I think sometimes we are looking for the reasons that we're going to fail before we even try.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the biggest stain on a community that professes to be one of faith. To be in a position where you are looking for, exaggerating, sometimes manufacturing the reasons not to do it, the reasons that you're going to fail before you've even tried.
Yeah, sometimes outright lying, right?
Sometimes
Yeah.
it is. And what it comes down to is a form of self-justification. Like, I don't have to care or love people because these things, right? We don't have to go and take the land. Oh, they're not listening to the gospel anyway. They're just going to take these Bibles that you hand out and roll cigarettes with them. They're not going to, no one's even listening to what we say. They just want a handout. They're not looking for a hand up. But I don't think the Christian church generally offers a hand up. I think instead of offering the hand of fellowship, they offer the backhand of fellowship.
Yeah, or what I've seen, they carry on in their ministry, but they do it begrudgingly.
Yep.
They do it without love. It's like, oh, this is something we have to do. We have to do the corporal works of mercy. We have to clothe the naked. We have to give water to the thirsty. We have to feed those who are hungry. And they don't appreciate it. They're never going to do anything with it. They're never going to change. But by the grace of God, we're going to do it anyway. And they do it begrudgingly.
Yep.
They do it half-heartedly. There's not much love in it. There's not much excellence in it. And you know what? People who are suffering, people who are in poverty, people who've experienced tragedy and loss, they can see that in the faces of those who call themselves evangelicals.
Of course, they set their face like flint.
Yeah.
The Isaiah talks about, God tells him, he says, set your face like flint, and he's telling him that for a purpose. But people set their face like flint against those that God has called them to minister to. Some of what you bring up really reminds me of Jonah. Jonah is one of the most resentful people in the Bible.
Yeah, the reluctant missionary.
I mean, he just flat out does not want to go. So much so that he refuses even to throw himself into the sea. He's like, nope, you do it. I am not participating in what God is doing. And, we focus on different portions of Jonah, the miraculous, deliverance from the whale, the parallel, as Jonah was in the whale, 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be. But at the core of it, the story of Jonah is one of disdain. Like, he hates the Ninevites.
Yeah.
And his attitude is like, well, but you don't know what they've done to me, God. Like, he is so personally offended at the Ninevites that he refuses to see even a single redeeming quality in them. He just doesn't think that they're worth saving. And he's aggravated that God would care when he doesn't. And it's like, well, God, you should feel about it the way I do.
Yeah, and they repent, and they turn from their wickedness, and they sit in sackcloth and ashes, right? The king's decree from the top to the bottom, even to the beasts, the cattle.
Yep.
And Jonah, there's a quote revival, if you want. I don't know if you'd call it that. We've modernized that, but there's something true and real that happens in the hearts and lives of the people in the city, the great city of Nineveh. And Jonah despises it so much that he doesn't want to live anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He becomes, the thing that's sort of an under topic of a lot of the stuff that I have the privilege of talking about. He becomes an accidental Pharisee. Like, he doesn't set out to be a Pharisee, but he becomes a Pharisee. He becomes unloving. He becomes all of those things that he despises. Like, the question that we sometimes have to ask is, the virtue, these principles that you have, do you have the strength to carry them forward, or are you just pretending that you care, just pretending that you love? Because a quote that I heard, and I can't recall who to attribute it to, was one that was shared with me. It really goes in the essence that the love that you have for people is demonstrated through the ways that you're willing to be inconvenienced by them.
Oh yeah, that's excellent.
It really is, and I think it fits into this. The statement that happens in this passage, Numbers 13. When he says, "Nevertheless," yes, absolutely, this is what it is. But who cares? Like, now is the time. Let's go. Let's go do it. Let's love. Let's care. Let's get our people Israel to that place of safety, and certainly looking at it from the context of these are warring people.
Yeah.
The fact that they didn't go means that they ended up wandering for 40 years. Had they gone, the people there might have repented. The people there might have learned to believe in God. It may have been a different kind of conquest. But instead, it created this wall, and we have 40 years of wilderness wandering.
So in essence, what you're saying is there is consequences. There's a ripple effect because of disobedience, because of a lack of faith, because of a lack of action as it concerns these things, and that's wonderful because and one thing that we and all of us who are saved ministers, have churches, we all think that we're Caleb, but I don't think we are Caleb. One thing I have learned reading Dostoevsky is that you have to put yourself in the place of the perpetrator.
Yep.
You're not Caleb. You're the 9 that would have stood on the sides and folded their hands and grumbled and complained. And I believe there are many ministers here in this state. They have done nothing but mumble and grumble and complain. And that's why their churches run 3 and 4. That's why their churches would be better off if they were just shut the doors and locked, and a new person would come in with fresh eyes. A new person could come like Caleb, that had faith, that had joy, that had the power of the Holy Spirit. And like you said, I believe what God says. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and pursue it. Let's go ahead and overtake it. But many of us, we think that we're Caleb, but we are on the sidelines grumbling and complaining and stifling and quenching the flame of evangelism.
Absolutely. The challenge that we face, we're not as good as we think we are, and we're not as bad as we think we are.
Okay.
But we look at other people
and
we don't see them as God sees them. And the reason we don't see them as God sees them is because we don't see ourselves as God sees us. He sees our frailty, he sees our challenges, he sees our struggles, but we have this bias that we're better than all of those things. And we're the Pharisee looking at the man beating his chest and saying, I thank God I'm not like that man. I pay my tithe. I do all these. I'm able to my life is full of the rich and good things of the world. But the man over on the other part of the temple, this Pharisee is looking at, Jesus is telling us. He beats his chest and he says, God forgive me, a sinner. And Jesus says, that man went home justified.
Yeah, because there's a juxtaposition there.
Sure.
In I think it's Luke 19. There's a juxtaposition there between righteousness and broken and contrite, right?
Yep.
And God will always
self-righteousness.
Self-righteousness. Yeah, because he's really not righteous in the correct context.
No, the other man is righteous in the correct context.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk about some of these things. Now, Albuquerque saw a major increase in the Albuquerque saw a major increase in homicides, murders throughout the month of August.
Yep.
Which is terrible, of course. There were 3 homicides in roughly 1 hour's time, right? In downtown Albuquerque.
Yep.
I believe, if I have my information right, that it was 2 brothers that were in a vehicle, and some kind of altercation took place.
Something happened.
He stabbed him in the neck, and it killed him.
Yep.
The
brother killed the brother.
Yeah, almost like a Cain and Abel.
Yeah, fratricide.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you think about that, and you think about how terrible that is, and I remember years ago, you were like me, we were downtown like all of the time. We're downtown all of the time. But now, I mean, I really don't have a reason to be downtown at night, but to go downtown at night is is extremely dangerous
It's
because
very risky.
it's volatile. There's all kinds of altercations. But a good friend of mine, he told me, he says, you're doing this thing, and you're going to talk about these homicides that happened in the weekend. You're going to talk about, unfortunately, the 4 people that were killed in the apartment with the suicide.
Yep.
The gunman turned the gun on himself, and he says, you're talking about all these things. He said, but just remember this one thing. He says, when these things happen, he said, people are involved with each other. He's like, we don't know why the altercations took place. Right. And so, that's one thing that we always have to focus on. Like, we don't know the other side of the story, right? We just get the feed. Right. Like, I get Albuquerque raw. And to be honest with you, like all through the month of August, it was like homicide after homicide after homicide after homicide. Yep. And I began to feel hopeless. And I began to feel like, the world was closing in on me, like I lived in my own little slice of hell. And some of that was self-pity, self-loathing. Yep. But at the same time, this scripture came to me, and we have to focus on the positive things that happen, because there are a lot of negative things that happen here in the city of Albuquerque, but there's still good people. There's good people downtown. There's good people in the international district. There's good people throughout this city, right? What is, sometimes we can get like the prophet. Remember the prophet Elijah, right? And he says, oh, I'm the only one. I'm the only one. I'm the only one. We're guilty of that all the time as well.
Absolutely.
You can be in a metro, you can be a minister in a metro area. You can be a minister in a rural area. And you can think, oh, we're the only one that got the Holy Ghost. We're the only one that have fried chicken on Sunday. We're the only ones that live a holy life. And if it looks like a devil and sounds like a devil, I don't want nothing to do with it. No, you're not the only one, because there's 7,000 that have not bowed the knee unto Baal. And those applications and those words, even though they're thousands of years old, they are still for us today.
Amen. Absolutely. We see things, we see different things, right? Like I'm reminded of the parable of the talent. There's 3 individuals. They each get 3 different quantities of things. And why the numbers? It has to be different numbers, right? So one person gets an abundance, the other gets something in the middle, and then one gets the smallest amount. They each get a talent, right? One gets 10, one gets 5, one gets 1.
And we see that through our capitalist lens.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, the thing that I've always wrestled with in that passage is that no matter how you dissect the text, the first 2 did not view the master that way. The first 2 said, we're going to invest it, we're going to bring a return. The last one said things that I think, unless you're reading intentionally in the Bible, you miss the point of what was said. He says, I knew you to be. I know that you reaped where you did not sow. And it's like the master saying, so we don't have the audio, right? But it's like the master saying, you knew that about me? Like, that's not me. No one ever said, like, the parable wasn't opened by Jesus saying, this master was terrible, that he reaped where he did not sow, that he did all these terrible... I mean, if it was relevant, Jesus would have put that in there.
It's left ambiguous.
It's left ambiguous, but we turn it, like you say, the capitalist lens, we turn it into something that I think it wasn't intended. And I think the root of that story, if you look at the context of the things before it and after it, is misunderstanding the nature of the Father. Yeah. And so when we become those selfish people that refuse to lend that help, give our time, we also misunderstand the Father. We start to think that God is someone different than he actually is. And it is as if the master would say, you knew me to be a person who didn't care about the broken? Who gave you that information? Where were you? That's what always reminds me in that passage. Where were you when I made the stars?
Yeah, and I remember, just doing some elementary, very, very basic readings with John Wesley. And John Wesley had the idea, he had the idea of, the blessed assurance, knowing that you were saved. But he felt that there were many Christians who saw themselves as slaves and not really sons.
Amen.
You know, like, God has given me this talent, He's given me these abilities, and I'm failing Him. I've got to try harder. I've got to work harder. I've got to sacrifice my marriage. I've got to sacrifice time with my kids because, by golly, I can't take this. I've taken this talent and I'm burying it into the sand, and God is going to come back. That's a misrepresentation of who God is. But I think that, you know, we see it, we run it through the capitalist lens, but we also run it through that fundamentalist lens, and we run it through the lens of the flesh, because the flesh doesn't see that God loves the Son. It's like, my sons, I love my sons whether they clean their rooms or not. I love my sons. It doesn't matter what they do. They're my sons. Now, I understand that you can, you know, there's people that they don't have good fathers, you know, but by the grace of God, I've tried to be the best father that I can be. But when you love a child, you love that child if you're normal, if you're, which is a whole other thing. Yes, but you're supposed to love that child whether he takes out the garbage, whether he gets A's on his report card. No, you love that child because he's yours.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. And a gift.
Yeah.
And a gift. So every broken person that you run across is a gift.
Whether you can conceptualize that or not, whether you even want to admit that or not. And I think the danger that we get in is when we know it's there. When we know it's there, and we know there's that ugliness in us, we know there's that darkness in us, we know that there's those stains upon us, but yet we try to pretend like everything's all right, and it's not all right, and that's why we never move forward.
That is absolutely correct. That's how we become accidental Pharisees. We go, like you hear somebody saying, you know, that you know, evangelism, this Christian walk is just, you know, one beggar telling another beggar where to get bread. But we become one beggar who suddenly is not a beggar anymore and is telling someone else to quit begging.
Yeah, that's Cracker Barrel theology.
Yeah, quit begging.
Yeah, Cracker Barrel theology.
Let's go get some fried chicken.
Yeah.
All you can eat catfish on Friday.
And then we can go to the gift shop, and then we can buy our Christian music at Cracker Barrel gift shop, and all will be right with the world. And, you know, let's hope Jesus comes back soon, because, you know, I'm ready to go, and the hell with everybody else, right?
Pretty much.
All right, now, I wanted to also mention this. There's been a rise in the unhoused killing each other. And there's a rise in the unhoused being killed or brutalized by frustrated citizens, right? The unhoused are getting hit by cars. New Mexico is the most dangerous state that an individual can drive in. That's due to bad roads, poor layouts of highways, cars with no tags. You know, my kid saw a man with a sheet over him on Central Avenue in San Mateo, over there by the cinnamon tree. My youngest son, Caleb, he goes, look, Dad, he goes, there's somebody dead over there with a sheet on him, you know, but, you know, that's just the way it is, right? It says, one thing I don't understand, right, is I don't understand why people speed through that particular area of town in the International District that we call the meat grinder, about the place where the state fairgrounds starts up to about Wyoming on Central. I don't understand why people speed in that area. And I firmly believe that these poor individuals who are getting hit by cars, I believe some of it's accidental, but I believe some of it's intentional as well, because people are just fed up with the trash, the drugs, and unfortunately people just do things for kicks.
Yeah, I mean, that there's a lot to unpack there. I don't know what the intent of people's heart is, but I think the reason they speed through there is because they don't want to see the brokenness.
Well, yeah, it's undeniable.
But they don't want to look at it. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to carry any burden for it. They want no responsibility for it. They want to be absolved of even having to think about it. They just want to
see, that's something I never thought about. Yeah,
I don't want to be here. I don't want to look.
Let's just get through it. Let's just pretend, because and there's no blame on their part. Like, I don't have anything to do with this. You know, I wash my hands. I wash my hands of this whole thing, of this stinking mess, of all this all the drugs and the prostitution and all the awful things, and you know, I have nothing to do with that, because if I had it my way, I'd do things different. And everybody has their own ideas about how they're going to solve this problem, and you know, we should never stop looking for ideas, right? So we have to maintain the optimism. And one thing I've noticed too is that the unhoused, they're being brutalized and killed by frustrated citizens. That, you know, that thing that happened downtown 2 weeks ago, there was a homeless man, and somebody just shot him after the bars closed. And every single one of these homicides that I talked about, the 3 dead, the unhoused, these murders, these triple murders, alcohol is involved. Alcohol is involved. What is it? 60%, 70% of violent crime that is committed while people are under the influence of alcohol.
I believe that.
And that's very, very dangerous. And it's something that, you know, what do we do with that? I don't know.
You know, it's you can make a buck on alcohol. There's a pretty good profit margin in it. It gets taxed a lot.
But not everybody that drinks goes out. And that's the caveat, right? That's the crucial component, because not everyone that drinks goes out and beats his wife. Not every person that drinks goes out and stabs his brother in the neck. Not every person that drinks goes out and shoots a homeless person in the face. Some do, but not everybody engages in that behavior. And with the unhoused that are being brutalized and beaten, you know, you know, the unhoused are being killed by citizens, and unfortunately there are mean and hateful people out there who they have no problem abusing somebody in that state, mistreating or even killing somebody in that state. They're self-justified, and that's terrible, and that's awful.
Absolutely. You know, there's something to be said about, you know, if we were to take a step back and look at the challenges that people face being unhoused. And so a reasonable person might look at an individual who is unhoused, who during the summer doesn't have running water, during the winter doesn't have running water, doesn't have a bathroom, doesn't have maybe the kind of stability in their lives, whether physical, financial, spiritual, emotional, and a reasonable person would say that individual is experiencing trauma on multiple levels. And so the challenge is not, well, you just need to get a job. The challenge is not, well, you just need to stop getting high.
Well, that's the Make America Great.
That's the
Make America Great Again thought. Like, you bums, just go out and get a job. Why can't you just stand up? Why can't you get yourself cleaned up? I work, I pay my taxes. You want to get off the streets, quit being lazy, and get a job. Well, it just doesn't work that way.
No, and sometimes...
And there's evangelicals that have that attitude as well.
Absolutely. You see them at Cracker Barrel on Sundays. Not disparaging Cracker Barrel. But it's a reasonable thing for a person experiencing that kind of trauma to want to do something about the trauma. Now, maybe they don't do what you do. Maybe they go get high. Maybe they'll go get drunk.
You can't blame them for getting high, right?
They're trying to deal with the pain and uncomfortability in the world, just like an evangelical Christian, you know, would find an escapism in the hope or the promise of that better life, the utopia
of Christ.
A person who is struggling with, you know, addiction on the street or brokenness is going to find a glimmer of hope in something that allows them to escape even for a moment. It's awful.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if I need the bathroom, I just go to the bathroom. I have 2 bathrooms. Someone's in the bathroom, I go to the other bathroom. I don't have to get looked at, you know, funny, or like I went to a gas station that's, you know, near the top of the International District, and they have all the straws in the front. Another gas station that I went to has all the cups in the front. Like, if you want a cup, you have to pay for the cup first, then you get the cup, and then you get to go.
You have to have the code to get in the can, to get in the bathroom.
Probably, yeah. Well, that just buying a soda that is 79 cents all the time. right?
Yeah,
The-
if they're even that cheap.
Oh, the big fountain. There's a store
Oh,
that has
yeah,
a
okay,
special
okay,
79
yeah,
cents.
okay.
And that store, you have to buy the cup first. There are no cups underneath the soda fountain. They're all behind the counter.
Is that the DK?
No, it's Circle K.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
They
yeah.
have, they have that Thirst Buster special, 79 cents.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic
Yeah, that's
deal.
pretty
You
good.
get 44 ounces for the same price as you would get 16 ounces. So,
Yeah.
yeah, get the big
And
soda.
people, and you know what? Nobody's talked about this, and nobody's really spent a lot of time on this. But the unhoused got crucified this summer in that heat.
Oh,
They got murdered in that heat.
and last winter in the cold.
Yeah, and the cold's coming. The cold's coming, and I know a few of the churches. I know a few of the ministries that tried to provide water. We, me and my wife, we tried to provide water a few times, but for the most part, I fear, and I will say without any objection, that a majority of these ministries in the international district, they failed miserably to meet the need of giving water to the thirsty.
Well, it's not their problem. It's that person's problem for being thirsty.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't have this problem if you weren't thirsty.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to be thirsty, then stop being thirsty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the long-term challenge, the man at the tomb of the Gadarenes, the Gerasenes, in Mark 5, this is a man who would break the chains that they would bind him in. Try and tie him up, roams the tombs.
No one could even go through that area.
No one could go through that area. Jesus gets out of the boat. He walks over there, and he sends his disciples away. When they come back, they're like, "What are you doing? Like, what on earth possessed you to talk to that man? Do you have any idea how dangerous that man is?" And Jesus presents an entirely different approach to this thing we call discipleship. And so we have this evangelical community. We have these churches that are like, discipleship is you come to the church at the time that I have said you should be there for these kinds of studies. But discipleship is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think that these churches struggle with reaching people because they refuse to sit down with the man from the Gerasenes.
Yeah, well, another reason too, from Catholic tradition, if you're not being effective ministering to the lost, if you're not being effective ministering to the broken, then something is wrong with your worship.
Yep.
You have to, worship has to be first.
Yep.
And if you don't have the worship component, if you don't have the prayer, if you don't have serious study, if you don't have if you're not, your worship is not pure, because the Catholics believe that the higher you go liturgically, the more you should go into after the Mass. After the Mass is done, you're supposed to go out into the world, make a difference in the world, make a change for the world. So, but I think that everybody's wanting to make the change. They're wanting to do this. They're wanting to hand out water. They're wanting to do this. They're wanting to put it on Facebook. They're wanting to do all this kind of, oh, look what we're doing. Look what we're doing. But they're failing as it concerns worship, true heartfelt worship with God, because you can't impact the world without worship. You can't.
You can't.
You can't do it. And I think there's a lot of ministries that are just running on fumes, and they have no fire and they have no drive, and it's just they're doing stuff, but I don't know. That's just an opinion I have.
No, I think you're on to something very powerful. If we were to reach back into the sermons we've heard for years, worship it comes from the blah blah blah, where it means worship, and what kind of value do you place on God, and it comes also to the imago Dei, and is that person made in the image of God? The thing that frustrates me about the church, and this, if you're watching this and you do this, stop. The thing that frustrates me is that we care more about a person half a world away where we're never going to go than we care about people in our own community. Like, skin tone is one of those things that comes up. Like, we will care about skin tone, a certain skin tone with more melanin in it, if the person is in a place that they're starving, without running water, without clean water, and warlords that are ravaging the community.
Half of them don't even know where the money goes.
But they don't care.
You send that money out, you don't know who's getting that money.
But you care more about a child you'll never meet than the people that are right in front of you. You care about something half a world away, but the same skin tone or the same kind of person here, you will look at entirely differently. Like our focus is, we'll go to, Jerusalem, Judea, to the very ends of the earth. We're like, I don't want to do anything here. I just want to go to the ends of the earth. I am
just
not
with
interested.
My checkbook,
Yep.
just with
Yep.
my PayPal,
Yep.
just with
Yep.
my online giving. That's how I'll
Yep.
go to the ends of the earth.
Yep.
That's how I'll get involved.
But no one starts in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We don't want to work in
It's
Jerusalem.
backwards. We've gotten
It's-
it backwards. We've gotten it mixed up.
But here
and
we
someone's-
are at the Gaither homecoming, right? All these voices and suits and ties presenting the image of holiness, right?
And
Look
on
how
the back of my
holy we
old
are.
Chevy is a fish and a cross
That's
for the
it.
world to see.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's my evangelism.
Yeah. What's the other one? Do you follow Jesus this closely? That's the one that I really like. It's like that's I don't know who thought that thing up, but they need to get rid of that thing. Throw that thing straight
it's
down the
marketing.
chute.
It's marketing, bro. It's the thing that we talked about before. Like you go buy something, right, at a store, it's made in China. Like we complain about the godless communists, but yet we buy stuff from them because it's cheap. Go to Michael's Hobbies, go to your Hobby Lobby. You can't shop there on Sunday, but everything comes from China.
Yeah. Now Albuquerque has a dark side or a seedy underbelly that includes mass murder and is still, unfortunately, taking place.
Yep.
You're familiar with the West Mesa murders. The
Yep.
West Mesa murders, there was 11 deaths.
Yep.
They believe that this was taking place from 2001 roughly to 2005.
Yep.
All the girls, most believe that these were women involved in prostitution or the sex trade. Yes, the women that were tragically and horribly murdered were from the ages of 15 to 35. APD or investigators gave the moniker the West Mesa bone collector.
Yep.
And recently I was working out on Gibson and 98th Street, and I was having to do flagging. I was having to. The road was closed because Star Pavement
you were doing this one?
was paving. Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
And I had to open the chute and let the let the concrete truck in, let the concrete truck out, let the tile work out. So I was standing there doing that, baking on the hot asphalt. Just sitting there, and I had this awful, horrid smell. I could smell it, and it was terrible. And I worked at a
From that
landfill. No, it was something dead, and I've worked at a landfill for years. In my illustrious preaching career, I didn't have the gravy train. I had to go to work, and I couldn't just sit around and get fat and watch television and let other people. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But I had to work. I had to work with my hands, and thank God for that, because it helped me to keep me humble, at least to some degree.
Keeps you from becoming an accidental Pharisee.
Yeah, it keeps me from going to Cracker Barrel and thinking it's cool. So anyway, I smell this horrid smell, and it's something dead. And and I was out there like 8 hours, just standing there. So I was like, I was kind of trying to figure out, like what it was. And so at the end of the day, the boss pulls up and and he goes, "How's it going?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "It's pretty bad." I said, "It smells like hell out here." And he goes, "Well, what is it?" I said, "It smells like something's dead." And remember where I'm at, Gibson and 98th Street. He goes, and I said, I tried to figure out where it was. I kind of went over there in the weeds. He said, "Don't go too far." He says, "You never know what you're going to find out here. You might find a dead body out here."
Yep.
That's the reality. That's the
reality.
That's the reality of Albuquerque, man.
Yep.
15 shallow graves were out there. There was a man in your church, Joe Man. He had unfortunately ties to one of those poor souls. All
of them.
And it destroyed him. I mean,
It did.
that's terrible. But
Yeah.
but so like, how do we find good in that? Because I've tried to figure that one out. And I mean, how can we be optimistic as evangelicals about? Well, one good thing is it stops, right? Those killings stop, right?
Yep.
But like, it's not as easy just to stamp out cliches and stamp out bumper stickers and stamp out Jesus hats, because these things they're very real that have happened here in this city.
Yeah. So it as evangelicals, and I still would include myself in that group. We try and present to people that they should be horrified at their own sin, like that their own sin, that the realization of how they have offended God should be something that is repulsive to them. As Church of God ministers, among the things that we adhere to and sort of that standard of how we should live is that we turn from anything that's not right or proper. We recoil from things that are evil.
I don't want, because if it looks like a devil and if it smells like a devil, I don't want to be anywhere near it.
Well, yeah, definitely that. But we stop caring about the people that died, and we're not horrified at that sin in our community. What many do is they just begin to dismiss it, and they go to Matthew 24 and they say, well, the love of many has grown cold, and these things are increasing because of lawlessness.
Yes, yeah.
And they're not bothered by the fact that people actually died, because I think sometimes to others they're not really people.
Yeah,
And that all by itself should be the kind of thing that horrifies us, that we are that ambivalent to those that died. David Parker Ray down in Elephant Butte is another one. Raping and torturing.
Boy, I tell you what.
And like just the Terry Clark. That's another one. He was the last person actually executed in the state of New Mexico. I think maybe 1994. Terry Clark, he was, he raped and murdered a little girl in the southeastern part of the state. Horrific crime. And so sometimes we become fascinated with the evildoer, right? We watch documentaries. And I'm not saying everybody does, right? Sometimes we're trying to understand.
Well, that's one of the big complaints about people who salivate over true crime.
They start to glorify it.
Well, yeah, because all you think about is Dahmer. You don't think about the 15, the 15 or 16 people that he murdered. You look at the toy box and you're like, oh, that's there's a novelty with it. There's a morbid curiosity, and you forget that those were people.
Yep.
And you forget that it happened. I was going water skiing out there when that guy was out there doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I was bass fishing.
Yeah, we go out there and we get drunk as hell and get a boat. I wasn't a Christian then, but we'd go out there and they believed that he was cutting people, dismembering people, and putting them in that lake. They could never. They never found a body. They never found any real hardcore evidence that he had done those things. But my goodness, I mean, so we can't escape that. And even now, you know about this. There's this man that was a Zuni man. And he, I can't Labar. I can't pronounce his last name. But
I think it's Sethelikai.
Yeah, Sethelikai, Labar Sethelikai. Yeah, Labar Sethelikai. Like he's just recently been caught.
Yep.
And they've linked him, I think, to 11 people. They think that, and he was preying on gay men. He was probably gay himself. Preying on gay men who were homeless, who were on drugs, and who lived on the streets, preying on the marginalized. I don't really think that we understand how dangerous
No.
it is to be a male or a female, and to be out there
Yep.
in the meat grinder,
Yep.
and to be out there in the middle. And people say there's no hell. No, there's hell.
Yep.
There's hell in places like that.
Yep.
And and I have here in my notes. Is that why is it so important that we re-examine these dark things in New Mexico's history? And I believe that we examine them to see ourselves as the perpetrators. Right? And you say, oh, I could never do anything like that. Oh, I could. Without Christ, you have no idea what you could do. Even with Christ, you have no idea what you're capable of doing. The reason we look at these things is to know what to pray for and what to intercede for. You need to recognize the patterns, right? I mean, we have to see that history repeats itself, and from time to time, you have to look into these things. But let us begin to pray and say, God, Jesus, help me with mine unbelief, and give me the vision that Caleb had.
Yep.
Give me the hope that Caleb had, because Caleb was able to look beyond the giants.
Yep.
He was able to look beyond the fortified cities.
Yep.
He was able to look beyond those things were impossible for them to do. They could never do that on their own. But Caleb had eyes of faith, and he had eyes of love, and he had not given up. And may we by and through the power of the Holy Spirit, collectively, corporately, through the church, may we find the strength that Caleb had, and realize that there's still good people here in this city.
Absolutely. Well, as we were prepping for this, one of the things that popped into my mind, and I'm not going to read through the entire portion of it, but Ezekiel 34, right? If we're talking about this fundamental uncaring nature.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time in Ezekiel, huh?
I have.
You know
I love
the major
Ezekiel.
prophet pretty well.
So in Ezekiel 34, this is a prophecy against the shepherds of Israel, and God is saying
to the shepherds,
to Ezekiel, he's saying, you look, like, you tell these shepherds that you keep trampling the clean water so that the fields, so that nobody gets grass and nobody gets clean water. You're pushing people with the flank and the horn. You're using your authority and your position to dominate others. And it goes so far, it's one of those passages people are like, and he shall judge between sheep and sheep. And he will judge between sheep and sheep. But his purpose is to ensure that his flock that he desires to rescue does not continue to be prey, and not prey to predators outside of Israel, but the predators within Israel. Those that would look at, like Jonah did, they would look at the things happening around them, the people that they don't like, and essentially they start to justify themselves and write their own evangelical version of Mein Kampf.
Yeah, and because Jesus says, not directly but indirectly, Jesus says, you saw the wolf coming, and you did nothing. You saw the wolf coming. If you've ever seen a wolf kill a sheep, it's one of the most horrible things you can. The sheep tear out the
crying and
stuff.
stuff.
It's horrible. But Jesus more or less says, you saw the wolf coming,
and
you
nothing.
did nothing because you did not care for them.
You don't care.
But I am the good shepherd, and I do not run, and I do not flee. And they wanted to. That's when some of the current began to change, and the opposition against Jesus after that sermon really began to rise and boil and bubble up.
We forget that we're hirelings. We think,
because there's only one good shepherd.
But we think we're the good shepherd.
Yeah. But we're not.
We're hirelings.
Yeah. Now you know this. And you know the answer for the drug problem, for ministers that are out there, for ministers that that are watching Gunsmoke and watching Pure Flix and sitting there eating potato chips, and they have them all over, spill. If you really want the answer for the drug epidemic here in the Albuquerque area, read Mark chapter 5, the story of the man of the tomb. that is the answer. You say it's that easy, not necessarily, but it's a great place to start, because I have been looking at that passage for the last 2 years.
Yep.
And I know that you look at it
Yep.
constantly,
All the
because
time.
you reference it constantly, because the drug problem
Yep.
is so, it has gotten to fever pitch here in the city of Albuquerque. You know, there's this new meth, and it's made out of different chemicals, right? The old timers have stated that this new meth, it just isn't the same. It just isn't as good, right? The old timers have stated that the new meth contains fentanyl. Remember, he said that he was smoking fentanyl with his Lolita girlfriend or whatever, and he said that he put him to sleep.
Yep.
Because there was fentanyl in it, and he said he hated it because he intended to do the methamphetamine so that he could experience euphoria, experience what methamphetamine does to you on all spheres. I'll just leave it at that. But he said he couldn't enjoy it because it was full of fentanyl.
I mean, the idea that people are going to sell you the purest thing that you can find is absolutely ludicrous. They're going to sell you whatever you're buying. And if what they're making has whatever in it, as long as you're buying it, who really cares?
Yeah, they don't care.
They don't care.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant whether you like it or not, because you're going to buy some more anyway. Like, it just, all of those things are irrelevant.
And it seems like this new meth, it rapidly induces aggression, psychotic behavior. It damages, of course, the cardiovascular system and severe dental problems. I see men and ladies in the international district all the time that can't be more than 30.
Yeah.
And they're walking around and all the teeth are gone.
I can speak from experience that, like, I used to do meth, and I started on the old timers dope, the biker dope.
Yeah.
And then
I did too.
You know, the
I loved it.
Prop dope, right? One
I don't
phenyl
love
two
it anymore,
propylamine
but I
and
loved it,
methylamine.
yeah.
And then, you know, I enjoyed, because I loved it too. I enjoyed, you know, the you know, home cook, you know, water pool, gas pool, like that stuff was radically different. Like the financial investment, like you could spend the same $20 and it would last you a week. Whereas now people are spending $20 and it lasts them maybe a few hours. And so, like, the things that people are consuming, we have no idea. Just like people are buying, you know, the potato chips and all this other stuff, they have all kinds of stuff, and we have no idea what people are consuming, but we just open our mouths and shove it in.
Yeah.
And we wonder why we have a problem with obesity because of the Cracker Barrel chicken, as much as we have problems with addiction.
And I remember, you know, the last time I did meth was 2005, 2006.
Same here.
And it was some of that newer meth, and I was drunk and I did it, and like it scrambled me.
Yeah.
I don't know what was in it. It was awful. And I was in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and I went down to the mental health department and I checked in, you know, the rubber, you know, showed up on the doorstep of the mental health with a bag over my head, you know what I mean? Just like the cartoons.
Doing the
and I was like,
shuffle.
I need some help. And they're like, what? And they took me to the hospital. So like, I don't know what that stuff was, but it wasn't that old timer peanut butter grit that I grew up with in the 90s. It was, you know, we've seen many in our churches with clean time, and they relapse, and they almost instantaneously show signs of psychosis, psychotic behavior, and aggression. It's almost like overnight.
It's instant.
Yeah.
Just like hate in people's heart.
Yes. Now we have the fentanyl. The fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. One M30 or a blue costs anywhere from $3 to $7 on the streets. You know, technically the withdrawal doesn't occur really until 12 or 48 hours after the last dosage. That's always debatable. Even Bill Burroughs, in his autobiographical story of his drug addiction, said there's a lot more shelf life than the junkie really wants to admit, but you go about 24 hours without any of it, you're going to start climbing the walls. You don't necessarily climb the walls after 1 hour. That's more or less a psychological thing, but there is a physical grip to junk or blues or opioids. That's absolutely true. There's the withdrawal symptoms, the muscle pains, cramps, nausea, goosebumps, all those kind of things. And what's so dangerous about the fentanyl is the cookie dough batch manufacturing technique.
Absolutely.
And the synthetic opioid is cut with xylazine.
It's cut with whatever it has, whatever they can, as cheap as they can make it, just like Hobby Lobby, right? As cheap as they can make it, sell it for as much as you can.
Yeah, and the cookie dough batch is what is so. I was explaining this to my wife because my wife likes to bake and she bakes very well, and so I was telling her about the fentanyl, the cookie dough batch, and the chocolate chip cookie, and like some chocolate chip cookies, they get 4 morsels of chocolate. Some of them get 2, some of them get 8, and that's how they're making the fentanyl. It's just people that are not chemists, they're not doing these things. These are people just throwing stuff into a mixture, making a compound, and then pressing and stamping out hundreds and hundreds of pills. And so that's something that we always have to look at. I looked at xylazine starts the animal tranquilizer. It's a sedative. As you get these sores on your hands and your feet,
you see them.
and if you and your legs, and if you don't
ankles,
do something about it, they'll cut your legs off.
They get abscess.
And there's no hell on this earth, right?
I know people struggling with those.
With the sores.
Yep.
Yeah. So we believe that our answer is found in Mark 5 for this, right? Because Jesus starts with something. First of all, he abandons everything and goes after the one. He crosses over
like
the
lost
church.
sheep.
Yeah, we have to begin to cross over the racial problems, cross over the pharisaical problems, cross over the bigotry, and actually go to where the people are, because they're not going to come.
They're not coming.
You have to go to them.
They would need a ride and they don't know what time it is. What day it is.
You have to go to them. But if you will go to them and you don't go to them and say, you're a low down, dirty drug addict. No, Jesus says, what is your name? Right? And like you said, a lot of people, they get that wrong because they think that he's just calling out the powers of darkness. But there's a human side to that. Jesus reminds the man that he is human
and has a name.
And how many people are struggling out there right now as we speak, just a few miles from here? They don't even feel human anymore.
No. Which is why they do the things that they do. Like, it can't be that, like, it can't be that unknown, right? Like, the reason that they're struggling the way they're struggling is because their life is horrible.
Yeah.
And who on earth wants to do that, right?
Yeah. And you know what? As evangelicals, as Pharisees that put hateful, ignorant, stupid things on Facebook, you know what? You better be careful, because it can happen to you.
You'll be judged by that same measure.
It can happen to you, and if you think that it can't happen to you, there's a good chance it might happen to you, because you're not walking in humility. You're not walking in love. So there's many of us, like, we've forgotten where God has brought us from. And so if you're throwing stones at people who are on dope, and if you're throwing stones at people who are living on the sidewalk, you know what? You better be careful, because you turn around one day and it'll happen to you. And it can.
It can.
And we think it can't. But it can.
The reason we don't see this kind of change in the world, that everybody is frustrated isn't happening, is because we misunderstand, like I mentioned, the call of discipleship earlier. Like in Matthew 4:19, Jesus says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. We don't call people to follow us. And mostly because we don't have a life that's worth following.
Yeah.
So
that can be better too, though, because
you're the only one that can fix it.
But if you want people to follow you, you better be. I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
And so since we look at people in the international districts, what we're talking about, our community here, since we look at people and we have these pejorative statements, we insult them, we think that they're less than human, all of these things that you just described, we refuse to say follow me, because we say, well, they're not going to change anyway. Well, you haven't asked them to follow you. Like, if you don't teach people how to be fishers of men, what are they supposed to do? Just magically get the download from Holy Spirit? They might.
Yeah.
But that's not how the gospel works. The gospel is, if we want to use that analogy, one beggar telling another beggar where to find bread. We don't tell them where to find bread. We tell them to stop being hungry.
Yeah. And we tell them to stop doing dope.
Yeah, and we never say follow me, because we're just like, I want nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Okay, now we need to remember that individuals who are addicted to substances are closer to God or religious experience than most realize. Finding God at the end of decadence and debauchery is actually a classical way to true conversion or regeneration. You find that in the prodigal son. You find it in Mark 5. Right?
Yep.
So people who are down and out, so to speak, who are completely lost on dope, like they've got a better chance to come to Christ, to come to the knowledge of Christ, that they might be changed, that they might be delivered, washed, justified, sanctified. They have a better chance than the person who's just kind of like, well, I've never done drugs and I've never drank and I've never hit an old lady or robbed an old woman or but this whole religion thing, who cares? I don't want nothing to do with it. I'm just bored with it all, and I'm just going to sit here and play video games and watch TikTok. Right? There's more hope for the person who's engaging, and I'm not saying go out and do those things or stay in that state, but it is a classical way to true conversion and regeneration.
That's how I got there.
Yeah. That's how I got there. That's how my wife got there. That's how Pastor Rose Coleman got there. Joanne Landry. A bunch of people got there like that.
We're all out there trying to kill ourselves.
Okay, I have a question here. This is a tough one. Is it wrong or is it sin for a Christian to be in favor of decriminalization of drugs? Because we have the drug problem. We have the fentanyl problem. One of the reasons we have the fentanyl problem is because remember the Oxycontins. Remember the legislation was passed, and so now they're trying to pass legislation to demonize and villainize fentanyl, which it is an awful thing. I believe that just as in Mark 5, the powers of darkness are at work in these things. There is something evil. There is something afoot that certainly is not light, but it's darkness and it's awful stuff. But now they change the legislation and they outlaw fentanyl, and what's going to happen is you're going to have men of color, whether they're African American or whether they're Hispanic or whether they're Chicano, they're going to wind up 30, 40 years in prison, and the cartels are just going to make something smaller and even more potent and even more horrible than fentanyl. So is the decriminalization of drugs, would that impact things in a positive way, a negative way, or maybe both?
So let me tackle that. I think it's a great question. So there are communities that have tried decriminalization.
Yes.
And they have changed course because it didn't work as they intended it to, or as they thought it might. Fentanyl is already a felony. Like, to possess it, it's a narcotic. It's classified as the same.
You're done. It's like crack in the 90s.
It's like crack. It's like heroin.
Smack.
It's like meth. It's like any of those drugs. They're all, the FDA has these different schedules, and they all fall under the same schedule. And so they're felonies to possess without a prescription, right? And there are the pharmaceutical versions of meth. There are the pharmaceutical versions of morphine. The pharmaceutical versions of fentanyl, pharmaceutical versions of cocaine. There's pharmaceutical versions of all these things. It's the illegal possession without a prescription. So the question of whether it's a sin or not a sin to decriminalize, I think kind of misses the point. Because even if you legalized the use of these substances, it doesn't change the behavior that leads people into that chronic and persistent poverty. When we talk about things like systemic racism, people get up in arms about it because they think it doesn't exist, but systemic racism exists because there are ways that things happen that have happened for longer than any of us can remember how they started. But because of how they work, they make it difficult for people to do some things. Decriminalization is that exact same thing. Now, is it a sin? I think people can take two different positions, right, and feel that they're right biblically. Is it helpful for people to rack up felony charges and spend lots of time in prison? I don't think so. Now, how do you keep them from going to prison? Well, you're not going to stop people from doing what they want because they want to, and they have the ability or the means to purchase and consume substances that they want to consume. So it's not about making a person stop or start, but it's really taking the time to walk with a person to help them learn to make better choices. And so I think that decriminalization misses the point of helping people learn to make better decisions. And overcriminalization misses the point.
Because a lot of people
decisions.
they look at decriminalization and they think that it's just going to be like, the doors wide open. There's going to be people running through the streets with firearms, throwing bricks through. They look at it through an apocalyptic lens.
Well, that kind of does happen,
but they don't see that with like the Portugal model. There's been other places who have tried decriminalization, and the decriminalization, it has harm reduction, it has treatment and therapy.
So that's a different component.
Yeah, the Portugal model is very different.
Right. And I think if you introduce that, and that was the next point that I was going to make, is that there is a component that is missing in either one of those, and that is that treatment model. If the church cannot bring people along and say, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men, let me help you learn to make better choices, then that is where that medical support, and specifically the phrase that you used, harm reduction, people are going to use anyway. People are going to hate anyway. The Ku Klux Klan is going to exist anyway. White supremacy is going to exist anyway. Black Panthers are going to exist anyway. These things are going to exist anyway. But there is an element of medical intervention where you can provide a safety net for people to either decide they want to continue doing that or they want to begin a transition plan to live life differently. And that's where the Portugal model really differs from, say, Oregon's model of just decriminalization. Like, it's no longer illegal to have these things, and so people are literally just in the park and everywhere just getting high. There's needles everywhere.
Now my final question: are evangelicals even willing to re-examine the possibility of decriminalizing drugs, or is it just strictly the apocalyptic lens, like, we need to solve the homeless problem, we need to solve the drug problem, just lock them up?
So that's where I think the evangelical church wants to flip-flop on issues. Because in one sentence they say, well, we want to create a utopia and we're going to use the government to do it. And in another way, they're going to say, well, we're not going to let the government tell us what we can and can't have.
But don't take away my firearm.
Don't take away my guns. And so this idea that you are using the criminal justice system as a tool, clearly the statistical data is there. It clearly impacts minority communities, people of color. Clearly, that you can do a simple Google search and it will give you all kinds of data on how this chemical warfare has created this challenge for people to either get sober or move into different things in life, because it's the, I want to say, it's a cautious thing. It's, to a degree, the over-criminalization, right? So it's not necessarily decriminalization, but I think there has to be an approach that examines the over-criminalization of things. Can it still be illegal to speed? We do not have the Autobahn here. There are speed limits on every road that exists. There is no speed limit on the Autobahn, but they don't send an ambulance out there if there's a wreck, right? They're not going to send help right away. Like, they'll get there when they get there at whatever speed they get there, but they're not like, because if you're on the Autobahn, you're probably doing everything that you can as fast as you can, just like a person who's here. And so there is a dearth, that means a significant lack, a dearth of the kind of approach that doesn't say decriminalization is the answer, but examines the over-criminalization and introduces more of that behavioral help. I've been watching a show fairly recently, and it's really not a thing that I normally do, but I spent I don't know, the last month or so, rewatching the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, and just sort of examining these things.
Archetypal.
Yeah,
There's a lot in those.
And those people were probably far more bored than we are, but they were less overstimulated. And I think that it's the overstimulation of the human being in the world we live in today that causes some of the problems that we have. It's why escapism is what it is. Like we see that cultures and people, 150 years ago, would play with a stick and another stick that was bent into a round wheel. Like that was, and now we have like families all across, even impoverished families have high-end gaming systems.
Yeah.
Like we are so overstimulated that sometimes the addiction issue is a means of escapism from the noise that happens in the world. Because, in these shows, and of course it's, fantasy and, high fantasy, it's not real. But like people live literally under a cliff overhang. Like when it rains and everything gets wet. Like we have umbrellas, we have mud rooms, we have all these different things. There is so much noise in the world that we live in that I think it has created a problem that we're not going to arrest our way and prosecute our way out of the drug problem. It has to come from an approach that is based on therapeutic approaches and faith-based initiatives.
Yeah.
And I think that the government, whether you're controlling it or not, and the faith-based community are both disinterested in creating whatever infrastructure is necessary to bring about that transformation. So it's easier to just criminalize and over-criminalize and over-prosecute than it is to deal with the issue.
Yeah.
Because we can tax you and your tax dollars are at work. You see the police car, they're arresting bad guys. Here's our most wanted list for the week.
Exactly. Well, we thank you tonight, and we're so glad that you have been with us, and we hope that you will watch this. That if you want to leave comments, go ahead, and we hope, and if you can, share this with someone. And we're trying to prayerfully get to some solutions here. And as I want to leave you with a final thought that says, let not your heart be troubled.
That's right.
You believe in God, believe also in me or in Christ. Thank you.
Amen.
Good night.